It was supposed to be a carefully managed affair, a national dialogue, a moment for the African National Congress, or ANC, to show it was listening. President Cyril Ramaphosa and his delegation walked in, expecting a certain level of decorum, perhaps even deference. They were, after all, the leaders of the nation, the inheritors of a liberation legacy. But something else was in the air on that day. Something raw and unfiltered. South Africans, tired and frustrated, came not to listen to speeches but to deliver a verdict. They came to speak their truth directly to power, without apology and without fear. This was not a dialogue in the way the politicians had imagined it. It was a reckoning. The day the carefully constructed wall between the rulers and the ruled came crashing down in a hail of inconvenient, painful truths. The venue was grand, as these things often are. A cavernous convention center draped in the national colors, with bright lights and an imposing stage. On the stage sat the President Cyril Ramaphosa. He was flanked by the top brass of the ANC, ministers and party officials looking important in their dark suits. In the audience were the people this new South Africa was built for: community activists, small business owners, unemployed graduates, pensioners, and concerned citizens from every walk of life. They were the living, breathing reality of the country, a far cry from the glossy pamphlets and upbeat government reports. They had come from all corners of the nation, their travel sponsored in the hope they would be passive observers. The setup was classic political stagecraft. The powerful on a raised platform, the people seated below. The ANC delegation seemed comfortable, practiced in the art of such events. They smiled, they waved, they adjusted their microphones, they had their talking points ready, rehearsed phrases about social compacts, economic reconstruction, and building a better future together. The proceedings began as planned. The master of ceremonies, a smooth and polished professional, welcomed everyone. President Ramaphosa himself gave an opening address filled with the usual rhetoric. He spoke of challenges and opportunities, of the need for partnership and shared responsibility. It was all very orderly, very controlled. For a few brief moments it seemed the event would go according to the script. Then the floor was open for questions. The first hand that shot up was not from a friendly face. It was a woman from a forgotten township in the Eastern Cape. Her voice, when she spoke, was not timid. It was a thunderclap that echoed through the silent hall. She spoke of the water crisis in her community, not as a statistic, but as a daily humiliation. She described children getting sick from dirty water, a promise of a pipeline that was now just a trench of broken dreams and stolen money. She looked directly at the Minister of Water and Sanitation and asked, not what he planned to do, but where the money had gone. The room was silent. The politicians shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This first act of defiance opened the floodgates. The carefully curated list of speakers was abandoned as people simply stood up and demanded to be heard. A young man, an unemployed engineer, spoke next. He held up his degree certificate. He spoke with a quiet, searing rage about his years of study, his hopes for building the country, and his reality of sitting at home, unable to find a job. One of the most vivid moments came from a community health worker. She was a middle-aged woman named Namsa, and her voice trembled not with fear, but with righteous fury. She did not bother with pleasantries. She looked directly at the Minister of Health. "Minister," she began, her voice cutting through the hall, "you come to our clinics for photo opportunities, you cut ribbons. But have you ever tried to get medicine from that clinic on a Friday? Have you seen the grannies who sleep on the floor overnight just to be told the Panado is finished?" The hall erupted in applause and shouts of "Yebo, tell them!" Then came a young activist from the Cape Flats. He was sharp, articulate, and utterly fearless. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His words were like daggers. He addressed the entire ANC panel. "You talk to us about the legacy of the struggle," he said calmly. "But the biggest struggle for my generation is against you. You are the new oppressors. You steal our future with corruption. You allow gangsters to rule our streets. The only difference between the old government and you," he paused for effect, is the color of your skin. Another unforgettable moment was delivered by a farmer from the Free State. He was an older white man, his hands weathered by work. "Mr. President," he started, his voice thick with emotion, "my farm is failing. Not because of the drought, but because the roads to get my produce to market are gone. The railway is gone. The electricity is off more than it is on. My black workers and my white neighbors are all in the same boat, and it is sinking. We don't need racial politics, we need a government that works for all of us." President Cyril Ramaphosa sat on that stage, a man visibly shaken. This was not the adoring crowd of a campaign rally. This was not a compliant parliament where his words went largely unchallenged. This was a trial by fire, and he was the one in the dock. The man who swept to power on the promise of a new dawn, and a pledge to end the 9 wasted years of his predecessor, was now being told, in no uncertain terms, that his own tenure was seen as a continuation of the same decay. The president's usual tactics were failing him. His habit of speaking in broad, soothing generalities, of promising commissions and investigations, fell flat. When he tried to respond, his words sounded hollow, disconnected from the raw pain that had been expressed. He would say, "We are seized with the matter, but the people in the room were seized with hunger and despair." He would talk about structural reforms, but they talked about the structure of the shack they lived in. The disconnect was jarring. It became clear that the language of the union buildings had no currency in the streets of Alexandra or the villages of Limpopo. The Fala Fala scandal, the elephant in the room, was inevitably raised. A man shouted from the back, "How can you talk about fighting corruption when you have dollars in your sofa?" The question, though crude, pierced the heart of the president's anti-corruption crusade. It exposed his greatest vulnerability, the perception that he is no different from those he replaced. The president was under siege, not by a political rival, but by the reality of the country he leads. And for the first time he seemed to have no defense. The national dialogue did more than just challenge a president. It unmasked the entire ANC political machine. For decades, the party has operated with a certain mystique. It was the party of liberation, the voice of the masses, the rightful heir to power. It presented itself as a broad church, a home for all South Africans. But in that hall, confronted with the unfiltered anger of the populace, the mystique evaporated. What was left was a political organization that looked tired, out of touch, and deeply disconnected from the daily realities of the people. The leaders on stage were not seen as liberators anymore. They were seen as a privileged elite, more concerned with protecting their positions than with serving the public. The event exposed the party's deep-seated arrogance. The initial shock on the faces of the ministers and officials gave way to a defensive posture. You could see them whispering to each other, their body language betraying their irritation. They were not accustomed to being spoken to in this manner. They are used to applause, to praise singers, to rooms filled with loyal cadres. The raw criticism from ordinary people was an affront to their sense of authority. They see citizens not as their employers, but as subjects who should be grateful. The dialogue shattered this feudal relationship, even if just for a day. Furthermore, the confrontation highlighted the ANC's ideological emptiness. When faced with specific practical problems, broken water pipes, unemployment, crime, the leadership retreated into vague, worn-out slogans. They spoke of the national democratic revolution and monopoly capital, while people were asking for bread and safety. This reliance on outdated jargon showed a party that has run out of fresh ideas. The political machine, once a powerful engine of social change, now seemed to be running on fumes, sputtering out the same old revolutionary rhetoric while the country it governs falls apart. So, the anatomy of public anger. Why did the dam break at this specific moment? The anger that erupted at the national dialogue was not new. It has been building for more than a decade. It is the cumulative effect of years of broken promises, systemic corruption, and a steady decline in the quality of life for millions. South Africans are famously patient, but there is a limit to all patience. That limit has been reached. The public anger is a cocktail of many ingredients, mixed and shaken over a long period of time. It is the frustration of living with the world's highest youth unemployment rate, where a university degree is no guarantee of a job. It is the daily grind of load shedding, which disrupts lives, destroys businesses, and really just symbolizes the state's inability to perform its most basic functions. The era of state capture under the previous administration inflicted a deep wound on the national psyche. It was not just about the money that was stolen, though the sums were staggering. It was about the profound betrayal of trust. President Ramaphosa came to power promising to clean house and hold those responsible to account. Yet years later, very few high-profile figures are in prison. The wheels of justice turn so slowly they appear to be standing still. This perceived lack of accountability has fostered a deep cynicism, a belief that the elite are above the law and that talk of renewal is just that, talk. Moreover, the social fabric of the country is fraying. Violent crime is rampant, leaving communities feeling besieged and abandoned by the police. The sight of crumbling infrastructure, potholed roads, leaking pipes, derelict train stations, is a constant, visible reminder of government failure. These are not abstract issues. They are the lived reality for millions. When people cannot feel safe in their own homes, when they cannot rely on the lights to stay on or clean water to come out of the tap, their faith in the state collapses. The contract between the government and the citizen is broken. Despite the anger and the pain, the national dialogue was not an entirely hopeless affair. Hidden within the torrent of criticism was a glimmer of something else, a deep, abiding love for South Africa. The people who spoke out did so not because they have given up on the country, but because they believe it can be better. Their anger was born of disappointed love. They were fighting for the future of their nation, for the realization of the dream of 1994. They were demanding that their leaders share that same passion and commitment. This fierce patriotic belief in the potential of South Africa is the country's greatest asset, and it was on full display in that hall. The event served as a powerful reminder that the country's future does not lie solely in the hands of politicians. It lies in the courage and resilience of its people. The citizens who stood up to speak truth to power represented the best of South Africa's democratic tradition. They were active agents of change, not passive recipients of government largesse. Their actions were a call to arms for all South Africans to become more engaged, to demand more from their leaders, and to participate actively in shaping their own destiny. For President Ramaphosa and the ANC, this is a moment of truth. They can choose to dismiss the event as a public relations disaster, retreat into their defensive crouch and continue with business as usual, or they can see it for what it was, a gift, a painful, difficult, but ultimately invaluable opportunity to listen, to learn, and to change course. They have been given a clear and unambiguous mandate from the people: fix the basics, end corruption, create jobs, and restore hope. It is a simple, powerful message. The path ahead is clear, even if it is difficult. The people have shown the way. What happens next is what matters. Words and promises will no longer suffice. The only response that will quell the public anger is action. Tangible, visible, and urgent action. South Africans have demonstrated their willingness to participate in building a better country. They have issued their challenge. Now they wait to see if their leaders have the courage, the will, and the integrity to accept it. The national dialogue may have been an uncomfortable day for those in power, but it may just have been a moment that helped save South Africa's democracy. It was a day of reckoning, but it could also be the beginning of a genuine renewal, one driven not from the top down, but from the ground up.